Hello, I'm Dr. Josh Grinath. I am a visiting assistant professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at Idaho State University. And I arrived here last year, and since then I have established the Community and Global Change Ecology Lab at Idaho State University. Let me turn on my timer here. Okay, so what do? I study global change. Humans have created or accelerated changes in natural systems around the world, and the drivers of global change include climate change, nitrogen and the enrichment of other nutrients to ecosystems, altered biodiversity, including species invasions, and altered fire regimes, land use and cover change, acidification. A host of different things are causing global change. And a grand challenge to ecologists today is to anticipate and manage how ecological systems respond to current and future change. The factors that I concentrate on in my lab have been climate change, nitrogen enrichment, and especially species invasions here. But more recently, I'm also thinking much more about altered fire regimes with this historic fire year that we are experiencing, as well as land use and cover change. And these global change effects can have direct impacts on organisms, but more often, the more important effects are indirect via species interactions. And when I talk about species interactions, I'm talking about how two species affect one another, and an interaction is defined by the net outcome of one species affect one another. And you've probably heard of these types of species interactions before, including mutualism, predation, parasitism, competition. And we can broadly think of these interactions as falling between two broad classes, including antagonistic interactions, which have negative components, where one species is negatively affected by another. And the other group are the mutualistic interactions that have only positive or neutral components, such as mutualism and commensalism. And when we think of more than one species interaction across an ecological community, we're thinking of ecological webs. And these two broad classes of species interactions have usually been considered in separate ecological webs, such as food webs for antagonistic species interactions or pollination webs for mutualistic species interactions. However, real ecological webs are composed of both types of species interactions, and this is the context of global change effects that I am particularly interested in. So a driving question for my lab is, how do ecological communities respond to drivers of global change in the context of multiple types of species interactions? And I'm asking this question in communities of plants and animals in grassland and shrubland steppe ecosystems, including this ecosystem, the Carrizo Plain of California. But my research has taken me all over the US, from upstate New York to Florida and out west here to Idaho and Colorado and California. And my current primary research is in Idaho and Colorado, and I have collaborations that are ongoing elsewhere. My collaborations in California are centered on the Carrizo Plain of California, which is a beautiful place where these giant kangaroo rats shown here alter entire landscapes via their burrowing and their foraging for seeds, and they interact with rainfall variability to structure this entire ecosystem. In Tennessee, I've been studying with folks to understand how cedar glades, and especially this plant here, cedar glade cress, is impacted by rainfall variability and the invasion of a cabbage seed pod weevil here, which came in on canola crops and is now impacting plants across the United States. In addition, I have been working with a couple of research teams who study fungal diseases, invasive fungal diseases, such as white nose back syndrome, snake fungal disease, and beech bark disease, to understand how these diseases are impacting the skin microbiome of these organisms and tree communities. But today I'd really like to focus in on my primary research, which is in sagebrush steppe ecosystems in Idaho, right in this area, and in Colorado, where in Colorado, this is my research site is in the foreground here, and this is looking up valley at a town called Crested Butte, in the mountain of Crested Butte up here. And I study plants and insects and mammals within these ecosystems. And what I'm going to do next is show you my research system here. And I'm going to build up an ecological web that's founded on a species of plant called rabbit brush, yellow rabbit brush, or Chrysothamnus facidiflorus. And a variety of herbivores eat this plant, including sap-sucking tree hoppers, larval lepidopterans or caterpillars, xylem-feeding leaf hoppers, and leaf-chewing beetles. And these herbivore species interact with a predator out there, which is an ant, the western thatching ant, which we have right here in our hills around Pocatello as well as these other organisms. And so these ants have a variety of interactions with these herbivores, ranging from predation to mutualism. And the mutualism that they engage in is with these tree hoppers here, and this is a food for protection mutualism, where these bugs are sitting on the plant, they are sucking sap from the plant, and when the ant comes up to the bug, the ant takes its antennae and it scratches the back of the bug, and the bug poops out a droplet of sweet honeydew, a droplet of processed plant sap, if you will, that's full of sugars, that is the primary sugar source for these ants. And in return for that food, the ants provide protection against predators such as this lady beetle. And together, the ants and these tree hoppers and other insects that are protected by the ants are taking enough resources from the plants that they decrease plant reproduction here. So here I'm showing two box plots of plant reproduction without ants present and with ants present. And here we're looking at the median value, and then these boxes and what are called whiskers show the spread around that median value. And we find that the plants that had no ants on them, where this mutualism was not present, had greater reproduction. So it's the strong mutualism between tree hoppers and ants and the negative effect of tree hoppers on plants that drives this indirect effect. But there's a top predator here. What could be this top predator? Turns out it's black bears. Black bears eat a ton of ants. In Colorado, almost a third of a black bear's annual diet is just ants, which is a lot of ants. And they come in the middle of the night and tear into an ant nest to eat the brood that are inside. And so here's some images that I took from my field site showing a bear ripping into an ant nest. And my research has shown that bear damage to ants cascades down through this web of ecological interactions to impact plants. And where there's bear damage, there's greater plant reproduction, as shown in this graph. So I was wondering, how might drivers of global change, and especially nitrogen deposition, impact this web of interactions? Humans have dramatically altered the nitrogen cycle, and atmospheric nitrogen is increasing across the world. Here we're looking at a heat map of atmospheric nitrogen deposition modeled for the year 1860. And today, this looks much different, where we have nitrogen falling out of the sky across vast landscapes of the world. However, relatively little is known about elevated but low-level nitrogen. There are many areas of the world that are receiving mid-range levels of nitrogen here, or low level, but most of the evidence that we have is for very high range nitrogen. So I went out and I conducted an experiment where I added nitrogen to these plots and found that under ambient nitrogen conditions, that this cascade of effects still occurred, but then under nitrogen added conditions, there was no longer this cascade of effects. And this occurred because herbivores had weak effects on plants in the presence of nitrogen enrichment, but and this is what caused there to be a weaker cascade of effects. And what this means is that current widespread rates of nitrogen deposition can alter the cascading effects of predators on plants. And this changes the resource versus consumer control of ecosystems. Now, there's more to this story. I have been manipulating nitrogen in this experiment for 11 years now, and have found that after 9 years, sagebrush had greater abundances of mutualist herbivores on these plants, on the sagebrush plants. So there's a potential that this cascade could be strengthening now, and I am returning to study the long-term effects of this. Additional research that I have going on is showing that bears are damage to ants is causing behavioral shifts in ants, and this is showing up in the stable isotope signature of these ants, and that these behavioral shifts in ants cascade down through this web to influence plant foliar C to N, or carbon to nitrogen ratio, and the percent of nitrogen in the leaves of those plants. And as I'm working on this project, I am conducting new research now in Pocatello, where my graduate student, Camden Kay, shown here, and I have been going out, and we have replicated sites across the valley that we are simulating bear damage, where we're going out at dawn to tear into ant nests and help understand how that impacts ant nest dynamics and population dynamics. And we are really interested in studying the effects of fire on ants now, as one of our research sites, where Cam has been working all summer long, burnt up in mid-July, and then another research site, Barton Road, shown down over here, also burnt up in August. So we have ongoing research in these areas that we are looking to expand. But that's all the time that I have for today to expand on my research. So thank you very much for tuning in, and it is time for me to turn this over. Thank you.